Miriam. Miriam Defensor, Santiago, made senators stop smiling the moment she opened a corruption file inside a Senate hearing. Television cameras caught lawmakers staring at their desks while she dismantled officials line by line. Her speeches mixed legal precision, sarcasm, and public humiliation in ways rarely seen inside the Philippine Senate. Could the Senate's fiercest critic survive the backlash? Her privileged speeches became national television events throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Supporters lined up outside hearings, while newspapers repeatedly placed her confrontations on front pages across the country. Radio stations replayed her clashes while hearing rooms erupted into shouting matches and applause. Powerful officials publicly attacked her as investigations turned into political warfare inside the chamber. Years later, younger Filipinos rediscovered her through YouTube uploads and viral debate clips. Politicians still get compared to her whenever Senate hearings descend into chaos.
President is hard of seeing, that's why he stood here. We have agreed among ourselves that to be visible to the Senate President, we shall stand up, even if he has not yet recognized us, for your information. Plus, please do not treat me as a mere observer. I am a judge in this proceeding. In any trial court, you go into a courtroom, you should not speak, you should not take any behavior at all, unless with the consent of the presiding judge. Do not drown me out by screaming in this courtroom. Only I can scream here, and my fellow judges.
Ninoy. Benigno Aquino Jr.'s speeches accusing powerful officials of corruption and authoritarian abuse regularly dominated newspapers and television coverage before martial law. When martial law was imposed in 1972, Aquino was arrested and removed from the Senate alongside other opposition figures. Would prison erase the dictatorship's loudest Senate critic? Instead, Aquino's speeches continued circulating through anti-Marcos protests, church networks, and underground publications throughout the country. His image became one of the strongest symbols of opposition during the martial law years, despite years inside military detention. Student activists and church groups repeatedly quoted his old Senate speeches during protests against the dictatorship. International attention surrounding Aquino continued growing as criticism of the Marcos government intensified during the late 1970s and early 1980s. After his assassination in 1983, more than 1 million mourners joined funeral marches stretching through Metro Manila. 3 years later, the People Power Revolution forced Marcos out of Malacanang.
Marcos, I said that after my 8 years in prison, I have lost appetite for office. I am no longer seeking the presidency of this land. I'm not seeking anymore any office in this country. But believe me, I said, when I tell you that while I have vowed never to enter the political arena again, I shall dedicate the last drop of my blood to the restoration of freedom and the dismantlement of your martial law.
Diokno. Jose W. Diokno lost his Senate seat and his freedom after refusing to stay silent during the rise of martial law. When martial law was declared in 1972, soldiers arrested him without charges and detained him for nearly 2 years. Would years in detention finally break him? After his release, Diokno helped establish the Free Legal Assistance Group, or FLAG, one of the Philippines' most influential human rights organizations. He defended activists, political prisoners, and martial law victims inside packed courtrooms across the country. Families of detainees regularly sought legal help from groups connected to Diokno during the martial law years. His Senate writings later shaped constitutional debates after Marcos fell from power. Human rights groups continued using Diokno's writings long after the dictatorship ended.
I am biased, I am prejudiced against martial law and the news siding. Mabuti na maliwanag ang usapan. I think you will understand why I am biased that way. I have been kept under detention for almost 2 years without charges, without trial, without conviction of any offense against our people.
Recto. Claro M. Recto openly attacked American political influence, while many Filipino leaders still relied heavily on Washington during the 1950s. His Senate speeches challenged military agreements, foreign economic control, and dependence on American policy direction. Critics accused him of being anti-American during the height of Cold War fear campaigns. Newspapers and political posters regularly targeted him for refusing to follow pro-U.S. positions. Despite the backlash, Recto became one of the strongest nationalist voices ever produced by the Philippine Senate. His speeches later influenced generations of nationalist politicians and student activists in the Philippines. Manglapos. Raul Manglapos became one of the Senate's youngest members, while openly criticizing dictatorship and foreign political influence. His speeches blended nationalism, democratic reform, and attacks against authoritarian power during the decades surrounding martial law. When opposition figures were silenced or forced into exile, Manglapos continued criticizing the Marcos government through speeches and organizing abroad. Filipino communities overseas attended anti-Marcos gatherings where Manglapos delivered speeches attacking the dictatorship during the 1970s and 1980s. After democracy returned, Manglapos remained one of the country's strongest voices on foreign policy and democratic institutions.
Mr. Reagan, why is it that you send your Marines to the Lebanon to die for democracy? You send your Marines to Grenada to die for democracy, and yet you send Mr. Marcos 900 million people, $900 million in order to keep democracy from returning to the Philippines.
Salonga. Jovito Salonga returned to the Senate, carrying shrapnel inside his body after surviving the Plaza Miranda bombing in 1971. The explosion tore through a Liberal Party rally in Manila and injured multiple opposition figures. Years later, Salonga became one of the Senate's leading anti-corruption figures after the fall of Marcos. His investigations into hidden wealth and dictatorship-linked corruption became some of the country's most recognized Senate inquiries after People Power. Television coverage of Senate investigations pushed corruption scandals back into national headlines during the late 1980s and early 1990s. As Senate President, he helped restore institutional credibility after years of dictatorship and political upheaval.
Therefore, I vote no to this treaty, and if it were only possible, I would vote 203 million times no. I also vote a resounding yes to the resolution of non-concurrence. Salamat po at mabuhay ang bansang Pilipinas. Thank you, Mr. President.
Tañada. Lorenzo Tañada kept appearing at nationalist campaigns and protest marches long after most politicians from his generation faded from public life. He became one of the country's strongest Senate voices for civil liberties and national sovereignty during the post-war decades. During the Marcos dictatorship, Tañada joined opposition protests despite the risks facing government critics. Television footage regularly showed him marching beside younger activists during anti-dictatorship demonstrations in the 1980s. Years later, he strongly opposed the continued presence of American military bases in the Philippines. The Senate rejection of the U.S. Bases Treaty in 1991 became one of the biggest nationalist political moments in modern Philippine history.
Well, I think no Filipino who loves his country will become pro-bases. Why? Because with the bases in the Philippines by the United States, our independence is undermined. That is the main reason. Second reason now is because of the nuclear weapons.
Rocco. Raul Roco sounded more like a professor than a traditional senator during major Senate debates in the 1990s. Instead of relying on political theatrics, he built his Senate image around classrooms, reform, and clean governance. Roco became one of the youngest senators elected during the post-Marcos era, while quickly building support among students, teachers, and middle-class voters. Inside the Senate, Roco pushed education modernization, consumer protection, and electoral reform measures. Education groups and universities regularly invited him to governance forums and reform discussions during the late 1990s. Even after his death in 2005, his name continued appearing in conversations about reform-oriented Senate leadership.
We noticed there are no people in the prosecutor's seats. We respectfully move to adjourn until this matter is settled and we can proceed.
Angara. Edgardo Angara helped reshape the modern Philippine Senate through education reform, economic legislation, and institutional modernization. His fingerprints ended up on laws affecting classrooms, banks, hospitals, science programs, and technology development across the country. Inside the Senate, Angara became one of the most active legislative coalition builders of the 1990s and 2000s. His work influenced scholarship expansion, science development programs, and public health care legislation during multiple administrations. Unlike more confrontational senators, Angara built influence through negotiations, committee work, and long-term policy alliances inside Congress. His long Senate career turned him into one of the chamber's most influential institutional operators.
And I vote yes to this measure because it's an affirmation of our basic human rights, especially the rights of women and the right to reproductive health. At the moment, we have to respond to the challenges that threaten our country.
Pimentel. Aquilino Pimentel Jr. spent years fighting to move political power away from Manila and into provinces, cities, and municipalities. During the Marcos years, he faced arrests and political pressure tied to opposition activity. After democracy was restored, Pimentel became one of the Senate's strongest advocates for decentralization and local autonomy. He helped lead the passage of the Local Government Code of 1991, one of the most influential governance laws in modern Philippine history. The law expanded the powers and resources of local governments across thousands of communities nationwide. Decades later, debates about federalism and regional autonomy still regularly trace back to Pimentel's Senate reforms.
Nobody has a monopoly of what is good for our country. We should listen to the voice of the people. If the majority of our people do not believe that revising the Constitution through a Constituent Assembly is the best way to do it, then probably the course of action that is now being undertaken by the government should be revised. Although I would find it extremely difficult to do that, considering that both houses apparently have already taken the cue from the President to revise the Constitution through a Constituent Assembly. So it will take a lot of effort to undo that.
Flavier. Juan Flavier entered the Senate carrying the image of a rural doctor instead of a traditional political operator. Inside the Senate, he pushed legislation tied to public health workers, tobacco regulation, and community healthcare systems. His Doctor to the Barrios identity made him one of the most publicly relatable senators of the 1990s and early 2000s. Public health campaigns linked to his image reached remote communities across the Philippines through radio programs and barangay outreach. His approachable image helped turn public health care advocacy into a far more visible national political issue during his Senate years.
Polio ay pwedeng maalis. Sa February 16 at March 16, may libreng oral polio vaccine sa patak centers sa batang below 5 years old. Sa babaeng 15 to 44 years old, magbibigay ng tetanus toxoid, measles vaccine sa batang 1 to 4 years old. Ito'y gagawin sa mga patak centers nationwide. Balik patak tayo! Let's